Hello children, today I shall be teaching you the play The Dear Departed by Stanley Houghton. Okay, before starting with the story of the play, it's very important to know about the writer first. As you can see here, Stanley Houghton was born in England and was an English playwright. He was a prominent member of the Manchester School of Dramatists, and his best known play is Hindlewakes. In every play, he sought to present an idea. He had a remarkable gift for dialogue that is evident in The Dear Departed. The Dear Departed was first produced in Manchester in 1908. Okay, let's discuss first about the play. Okay, as you know, this play is a drama. So before we start discussing the story or the characters, let me brief you about what drama is all about. Drama is a specific mode of fiction represented in performance. It is a composition in verse or prose intended to portray life or to tell a story, usually involving conflicts and emotions through action and dialogue. So, dear children, it's very important to know that, as I discussed, the drama is a composition in verse or prose. So we will be having a discussion over the story definitely, and it will be involving conflicts as well, and we'll be discussing emotion through action and dialogue. So now let's have a look about the play first. The Dear Departed is a satire. Is a satire that exposes the insensitivity and dispassionate attitude of those mean and greedy individuals who neglect their near and dear ones during their old age and impatiently await their death to grab their assets. Okay, so as you can see here, The Dear Departed was the first of many to be reproduced at the Gaiety Theatre. So it is a pungent satire, as I discussed, on the moral degradation of British middle class society. Two sisters, Mrs. Slater and Mrs. Jordan, are so mean and materialistic that instead of mourning over their father's death, they plan to divide his belongings. When the old man says that he will leave all his bit of things to whomsoever he living with he dies, they at once change their attitude and offer to have their father with them. So let me begin with the characters. So here is a list of characters. As you can see here, Abel Merriweather, he is the grandfather. Then Henry Ford and Mrs. Slater, they are husband and wife. So Henry is son-in-law of Mr. Abel Merriweather, and Mrs. Slater is the daughter of Mr. Abel Merriweather. Again, we have Ben Jordan and Mrs. Jordan. They are husband and wife. So again, Ben Jordan is the son-in-law of Mr. Abel Merriweather, and Mrs. Jordan is the daughter daughter of Mr. Abel Merriweather. And we have Victoria Slater, a girl of 10. Let's start about from the characters of the play. We'll discuss the characters one by one. So Abel Merriweather, the grandfather, he is an old widower. Since the death of his wife, he has been living by turns with his daughters Amelia Slater and Elizabeth Jordan. He is a fun-loving, jovial man who likes to go to pub and have a drink. Dear children, kindly note this. He is a fun-loving man, jovial man who likes to go to pub and have a drink. He is quick-witted and too intelligent to be followed by and show of affection by his daughters. He knows them too well, but still, because they are his daughters, he was planning to leave something in his will. However, when he discovers they behaved believing him to be dead, He decides to change his will, leave everything to the person he is living with at the time of death, and also decides to marry a widow, Mrs. Shorrocks, the keeper of Ringo Bells. He is a likable old man, much better than his daughters. He is Mr. Abel Merriweather. Okay, we have now another character, Henry Slater. He is the husband of Amelia and is a stooping, heavy man with a drooping mustache. He is not mean like his wife, but he has no strength to contradict what his wife says. When Amelia asks him to put on the slipper of grandfather, he reluctantly did that. He is a selfish and cunning, but not to the extent his wife is. Mrs. Slater. Mrs. Slater, on rather, Amelia is a very vigorous, plump, vulgar, selfish and a greedy type of lady. She is ready to do anything to do her work, and she also has no feelings for her father. Rather, she only has concern about the belongings. This shows that Amelia is a very disgusting lady. She is ever ready with a lie. Okay, she is Mrs. Slater, or you can call her as Mrs. Amelia Slater. Ben Jordan, another character. He's the husband of Elizabeth. He is a jolly little man accustomed to be humorous. He has a bright, chirpy little voice, and he remarks all the time that we have all got to die sometime or other. Even on a grave occasion, he humorously remarks about the grandfather. If there was one thing he could not bear, it was water. Internally, he is very timid. Elizabeth Jordan. In the play The Dear Departed, Elizabeth is envious, opportunist, as well as very mean. She always were in search of chances to grab their parents' valuables, rather than being sad at heart to their so-called dead father. And she takes every chance to grab all the valuables and belongings. This shows that both of the women were not at all affectionate towards each other and did not follow their filial obligation towards their parents and considered him as a burden. So dear children, let me brief you here about the title of the play, The Dear Departed. We'll discuss whether the title is really appropriate or not. As you can see now, The Dear Departed is a very well chosen title with irony and pun in the word departed. It highlights the satirical element of the play, as the departed soul is hardly dear to any adult character of the play. We can also see that in the first half of the play, the word departed refers to the grandfather's demise. And in the next half of the chapter, the word departed refers to the old man, Abel Merriweather, or the grandfather, who is shocked at the news of his own death and the various attitude of his daughters and sons-in-law. Now our play begins in, you can say, a short summary, or we can say a gist of the play. So play opens with Mrs. Slater, Amelia, daughter of Abel Merriweather and wife of Henry Slater. Mrs. Slater is preparing to receive her sister, Mrs. Elizabeth Jordan, with her husband, Mr. Ben Jordan. Though the death has been discovered a few hours ago, Mrs. Slater hardly seems grief-stricken. She instructs her 10-year-old daughter, Victoria, to change into a white frock with a black sash. Mrs. Slater grabs Grandpa's new pair of carpet slippers, asks her husband to wear them, despite them being of a smaller size. She also hastily shifts his new bureau to her room and substitutes it with an old, discarded and shabby chest of drawers. Reason? The Jordans are visiting the Slaters to talk over the father's affairs, as the Slaters have informed them about the death of the old man. So you can just quote the reason here and clearly understand that if her aunt Mrs. Jordan were to discover her in colorful dress soon after the grandfather's death, she would get sarcastic and taunting. She makes sure all this is done hurriedly with main doors locked so that her sister Mrs. Jordan does not arrive and see. She also warns her daughter Victoria not to open the door even if the Jordans arrive till the shifting is complete. Henry Slater feebly attempts to stop her, as all this done not appear delicate to him. After all, grandfather had just died. Victoria also dislikes this pinching, stealing, but Mrs. Slater is hardly bothered. Mrs. Slater has just one thing on her mind, that particular piece of furniture should look like it had always been in her room and belonged to the Slaters, because she did not want Mrs. Jordan to claim, bargain over it as part of their father's property. She also grabs the grandfather's clock. Her mourning dress is not quite up to the mark at the fact that her sister Mrs. Jordan might outshine her was a fact that was strongly playing on her mind. The Slaters are in for a shock. The Jordans arrive while they are in process of shifting furniture. So the Jordans are now there and they are dressed in complete and proper mourning outfits. The sisters meet each other and pose that they are greatly disturbed. They seem to be sniffing non-existent tears. The Jordans then accuse the Slaters of not sending for a doctor if Mr. Pringle, the family doctor, was unavailable. The Slaters attempt to defend this. The conversation moves on and Mrs. Slater informs how their father had gone out early soon after breakfast to pay the insurance premium. She also declares how he had come back drunk and fallen asleep. She further mentions how his dinner tray had to be kept on the bureau as she was asleep. She quickly realizes that she had shifted furniture and says the tray was put on the chest of drawers. She was relieved that nobody really noticed. She then also tells how she found her father lying dead and cold in the bed and how Henry was informed about it. The Jordans, who had come to Slater's on the sad occasion of father's death, preferred to have tea before going to have a look at his dead person to pay tribute. You can here understand basically how the writer Hogley is basically trying to satirize the basic subject of our play, which is the moral degradation of the values, especially a case with the British class. In the meantime, they also discuss the obituary note that they would like to put in the newspaper. It is indeed troublesome as a reader to notice that these characters are all keen to have something more for the look of it, okay, rather than as a content to express heartfelt grief. Dear children, I would like to mention here, and this is something really important, Mrs. Jordan suggests that a list of all grandfather's assets should be drawn up, and in the same breath she claims that her father had promised his gold watch to Jimmy, her son. Mrs. Slater expresses her doubt about this as well. Ben Jordan brushes aside this topic and asks if the Slaters had the receipt of the premium paid by Mr. Merriweather. It is then that the grandchild, okay, Victoria, informs that he did not go to the town to pay premium but went to Ring o' Bells, his favorite pub run by John Sherlock's widow. This probability of his not having paid the premium upsets everyone, as they felt they would lose out on a lot of money. Okay. To confirm this, Mrs. Slater sends Victoria to grandfather's room to fetch the keys to look for the receipt in the bureau. And in the meantime, Jordans get suspicious about the bureau and ask a whole of questions and also examine it. Before the truth of bureau comes out, Victoria comes down to say that grandfather was getting up. So immediately after this, Abel Merriweather appears on the scene. He is surprised to see Jordans there. He is equally puzzled and curious about their mourning outfits. His queries are answered clumsily by all present. Soon after, they all settle for tea. Mrs. Jordan's effort to clarify things make grandfather remember having a recollection of the fact that the Slaters had come to his room to carry the bureau away. He is shocked to see his bureau and clock in the sting room. Elizabeth Jordan tries to explain that the Slaters tried to rob him after they thought him to be dead. Mr. Merriweather is amused to hear about his own death. He, however, expresses his shock at daughter's hurry to divide his assets and announces that he would make a fresh will naming all his assets for whoever he would be living with then. Both the sisters quarrel, or you can say we with each other, to have the father with them. Abel Merriweather gives them a shock by announcing that he has 3 important things to do on Monday next. The first thing, get his will altered. Second, pay his premium. And third, get married to Mrs. John Sherlock's, who was the owner of the Ring o' Bells. He also declares that he would move with bag and baggage to Ring o' Bells along with the bureau and leave everything to the lady he was marrying. He departs from them finally. So from the story we get to know, or we can say the message the play conveys is that all people deserve to be treated with great care and love. Their days in the world are numbered, thus looking after them should be regarded as an opportunity rather than a tiresome burden. Also, the old should make their wills discreetly without being swayed by emotions and sentiments. Thank you so much. Hope you understood the play well.